I was so surprised. I mean, I thought the interview went well, but I knew of the Japanese system.
Hey guys, welcome back to the KoreKara podcast. So this week we talked to James, who's a fellow Japanese learner. He's studied abroad in Japan, he's lived in Japan and worked in Japan. And so we talk about his experience there, his experience learning Japanese in a professional setting, and also why he decided to leave Japan recently.
And of course, guys, this is that time of every video where you guys gotta absolutely obliterate the like button. I know James wants you to do it, so we want you to do it too. And with that, I hope you guys enjoy the podcast.
Yeah, so James, can you give us a quick background of who you are and where you're at today?
Sure. Hey everybody, my name's James. So I lived in Tokyo for 3 years, did 6 months at Sophia University as a study abroad student. And I worked in quantitative finance. And then now I'm based in New York after leaving during COVID. And I'm still an avid Japanese learner. You know, my computer is actually stacked on a Genki textbook to show you how committed I am to Japanese learning and this podcast.
But do you have both Genki textbooks?
So the reason why I have Genki is because I left it at my parents' house. I didn't take it with me to Japan. And then I took Genki 2 to Japan just because I like to look at the grammar. And then when I came back, I was like, I have no need for this. And I just donated it to the gods. You know, I just put it in the Japanese trash can, and I had hope that maybe, you know, a foreign student was in need of a Genki textbook and would pick it up.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say you gave it to Bill, but
oh, damn, that would have been better.
Well, Bill doesn't need.
Yeah, Bill doesn't need it though. He would have given it to someone else. He would have he would choose the right person, the chosen one.
Yeah, he's the author after all. But yeah, you said you went over to Japan like initially with a study abroad.
So before I studied abroad in Japan, I did an Asia study abroad actually, where I started learning Japanese, but I didn't feel fully committed to actually going to the country. Actually, I never left the country, so I never left the U.S. except for going to Aruba, you know, on holiday with my family. So I was like, okay, you know, I want to get a feel of other countries, and this Asia study abroad program sounded so cool, where I'd live out of a suitcase, take business classes with the professors that led this backpacking trip. And we went to over 12 countries, 24 different cities, got to analyze different company locations, you know, with going to like Ford factories in Thailand and Cambodia, see how the different factories were set up and how they would adjust their products to fit the consumer there. And then as I was getting closer to going to Japan, like on that trip, we spent a week in Tokyo. I was just so hyped. And then I got there and I was like, oh, like this is like the promised land. And so I knew how to rearrange like my courses and my schedule. And then a year later, I went to Sophia. I was actually supposed to go to Akita International University, but they received too many applications and they decided not to let me know at all. So I scrambled and I found Sophia, and I was so grateful because I had such a great experience doing that program. And I studied Japanese. So I did an intensive Japanese class where it was pretty much 40 hours a week. It was 12 credits. And
like 8 hours a day.
Yeah, so it was 4 hours of class and then like 4 hours of homework, like that. Like that's how they structured it. And so you had kanji quizzes every day, and it would just build. And the kanji wasn't integrated with the grammar points, and you had to do like a lot of speaking. It was set up really well. I learned so much, but it also felt like just like an army boot camp where, you know, just bonding and misery and fun with all my classmates. And I felt so bad for the other classmates because it was all in Japanese, but the rare chance that we had with the textbooks were in English. And so you had people from Malaysia, France, and Germany, and they had to rely on their other language as like their only crutch. Right. And I was like, wow, that's so impressive. Like, you know, being an American, and you have Americans who are mostly monolingual, and then you have these trilingual people trying to, you know, keep their head above water, possibly exceeding me on tests, and I'm just trying to do Japanese. Yeah. So that always was so much fun, just to have that that like community where like, okay, we're in this together, we're gonna learn Japanese together, it was like this intensive program. I took another class where it was Japanese history. It was taught in English, so at least I could get a break.
And so that was like a year that you were there.
So I was there for 6 months, and then I flew back to my school. Did 6 months, so my last semester of senior year, and then I graduated, and then I came back to Japan because I got a job offer when I was studying abroad. So I got a job offer, and I was like, yes, I can continue being here and continue living this dream.
So how good was your Japanese, if you remember, like during those milestones, like maybe like just when you arrived in Japan for your study abroad, and then by the time you left, and then by the time you were like interviewing with like Japanese companies?
Yeah, so I'm sure with what you guys can also relate is when you start a Japanese language class or you start learning Japanese, you feel like your Japanese is very good, citing like the Don Kruger effect, where you learn a little bit and you feel like you're like, okay, I got everything. Like I got all the pieces. So I did 3 classes of Japanese in build-up before the study abroad. So it was like beginner 1 Japanese, beginner 2, and then intermediate. And of course, the beginner 1 class was just hiragana, katakana, some very basic grammar. And I learned that maybe I wasn't as good as I thought I was. So I would say after the 3 classes, I was maybe like N4, maybe between N5 and N4. And then to get into the intensive class, you have to be able to at least have N3 because it's only in Japanese. So you had to take like a placement test. I wanted to get into a higher one, but I thank God every day that I wasn't in the higher one because I would have failed out. Because the intensive one, whereas it started low, it built so quickly where you needed at least, I think, 500 to 600 kanji to be able to read and write. And then you ended at like 1,200 in 6 months.
Oh,
and
wow.
so like that's on top of learning like grammar points and your listening ability and writing. So it scaled quickly. And then I think at the end of the program, so after the 6 months, I would say maybe somewhere between N2, N3-ish, I would say, because there were grammar points and there were kanji that we learned that were not, associated with the JLPT test. So it was more like you learned a lot of like niche vocabulary at times.
But you were comfortable like having most conversations at that point?
Yeah, so the class was only Japanese. If you needed to use English, you had like you had to like raise your hand a certain way, and you had like 1 or 2 chances to use that per class. So it was very limited.
Wait, so you said you were a quant?
Yeah, so there was like a few like job fairs at the university, and a lot of them were English, Japanese based. And so Sophia didn't really have such a strong business program. And like all of my study abroad students that I was with, they weren't really business majors either. They were more like liberal arts or maybe like communications. And so I found like a few companies who were very focused on business and technology. And I was interested. So I spoke to them a bit, and then I learned more about the company, and then I just gave them my resume. And one of the companies that I wasn't sure if I wanted to work for ended up giving me the only interview. So I applied for like 4 companies. A lot of them were big, like Panasonic, Sony, and then this small company that is it's near like Yotsuya Station. And so I applied there, and then I got a call back, and then I went there, and they gave me the job on the first interview. But I was so surprised. I mean, I thought the interview went well, but I knew of the Japanese system that like, okay, you gotta go through like 5 to 6 people.
Right.
But one of the questions I asked is, I'm interested to work in Japan, but I'm a little bit hesitant to work for a Japanese company. And the CEO, who was Korean, he had rest assured to me that, we're more like internationally thinking. We have flexible hours at times. And so that really sparked my interest as well, because it was the kind of business I wanted to do. It was the environment I wanted to do. I didn't want to do a lot of overtime and, be viewed with the same mindset that's under like a Japanese business where, it's not about the quality of work, but it's more about you always showing up and being your best self there. So I was offered the job, and then I was so nervous because I was like, oh, can I just trust to move myself here, that I said, oh, can I do an internship before I leave? So I did a week internship, like the last week that I was in Japan with them. And I just loved it. Like the first meeting I had, it was like a merger and acquisition deal with a US company that was interested in buying a Japanese company, and I helped translate that. It was the first time I ever did anything like that. So I was throwing out vocab words that I knew out of the back of my head to try to make sense. Like instead of saying like the word to acquire a company, I said to purchase a company, which, is very different, but it got the job done essentially for the meeting. And I was after that, I was questioning like, oh, am I capable for this? Is my Japanese good enough? Am I ready to take this on? And so I went back after the 1 week internship, and I did 6 months at my university. And I was so nervous. I was like, am I ready for this big move? Like a lot of times we ask for things, we dream of doing things. And then when we're given the opportunity of it, I don't know. I feel like for myself, sometimes like, do I deserve this? Am I capable of, achieving this or getting to this place? So
like after that you worked there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what was like the whole experience of like working in Japan, like the work culture that you experienced?
Yeah, so I graduated, and then I moved to Japan, and then I worked like 2 days later. So I I moved into a new apartment, and I worked 2 days later, and I found the work culture very interesting at first. Like everything was brand new, how people conducted like meetings and communicated, and the salary payment was just all so interesting. So for example, in Japan, a requirement is you have to log what hours you work. So when you come in for the day, you have to say what time you came in and what time you left. And this was a new regulation that was implemented to curb, overtime, so that they could track, okay, this guy worked from 9 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. And so I learned that every company does this. At first, I thought it was my own company. But so every company, I had met some people who worked at Coca-Cola and Toyota, and they all do the same thing. So it seems like there's like a nationwide thing for they do that. Another thing that I learned is like you lose a lot of individuality when you work in a company in Japan. Whereas like you're kind of viewed as like the collective and not on your own performance. So to give some background on my job, I would meet with like foreign exchange traders, so traders who worked at Japanese banks, so at like a Mitsubishi or a Sumitomo Ginko, and we would go over trading strategies. So the firm I worked for was a platform that allowed for these traders to design like their own Python trading queries and stuff. And so I would meet with them. So I was pretty much like a relationship manager at times. I was a salesperson. I would offer them new products, and then we also had this crypto business where we were taking the FX, the foreign exchange business, and then converting it with Bitcoin and Ethereum to those kind of traders. And so I was going to like cryptocurrency conferences in Tokyo and Yokohama, and then a year later we were working with an engineer who was building the supercharge technology that allowed for a device such as like an iPhone or a computer to be charged 10 times fast. So if an iPhone that required 2 hours until a full charge, it was able to do it in like 20 minutes.
Wow.
Well, yeah, that's pretty wild. But yeah, so the whole job itself was like in Japanese, I'm assuming, right?
Oh yeah. So everybody there only spoke Japanese as like the common work language. So the company was 50 people total. We have some people in other countries, but in the Japan office, it was 50 people. That was like the headquarters. And so we had maybe a third Japanese, a third Korean, and then a third Chinese. And I was the only white guy. So the reason why I speak this way is that because the communities in the company were were kind of like a collective in that manner, where you had the Koreans who would always go to lunch together. You had the Chinese group who would always go to lunch together. And they were given the benefit of being able to talk in their own native language to each other. If they were in a meeting and it was only Korean people, then they were essentially allowed to speak Korean to each other because, there's no one there who wouldn't understand. So I never really had the ability to be like, hey guys, like, let's just speak English for the day. So I found that my Japanese improved a lot. I would say like the same in the intensive program, but a lot of times at work, maybe you guys can attest to this, is that a lot of times you're just at your computer, right, on Excel or Word, and you're not really speaking for like 3 to 4 hours, I would say at times. And I felt that like my Japanese would have to like start and stop a lot, where I would be at my desk and then I'd be drawn to a meeting and I have to use Japanese at a high level. And if I made a mistake, then it would be like a negative look on my reputation, like, oh, can James do this? And so I think at times that was a struggle in the beginning where you work 8 hours a day, and then like one meeting is like the only time you'd really have a main speaking portion of it, where you got to speak for like 30 minutes straight. And I did speak a lot like at lunch and like with like my desk mates. But another part of the Japanese business culture is that you don't really talk amongst the group unless you're talking about work. So I wouldn't arrive to work and be like, oh, how was your day? How was your weekend? Oh, did you see the Yankees game? Like the Tokyo Giants. There wasn't a lot of that. So it seemed like there were a lot of barriers with all of the different colleagues. Like, we were there to work and to focus mostly on work. Whereas like I would try to spice it up and try to make small talk, but then it would look like I wasn't really working at times.
I see. I guess, that's a really interesting dynamic that you have over there. I guess when people are kind of looking in and thinking about Japanese companies, of course, you had a really unique situation in and of itself, but I think there are still a lot of similarities there between Japanese companies and what you went through too, right? Yeah.
So when I had the expectations to work there, I thought it was like a fully American company, Silicon Valley-esque. It was like a mix between a startup and a small company. It was like 50 people. We always felt like we were chasing like the next sale or the next big business. And that was a really cool feeling. But the longer I worked there, I realized that I was giving a little bit of treatment of being an American. Like, okay, he's an American, we should really lean on this like flexibility and like, being more casual. And then it seemed like over time I was given less of the grace, and as Japanese collective mindset is to be part of the community and not the nail that stuck up. So like a lot of times my Japanese was being judged at like the native level, or the Korean and Chinese groups that lived there for 20 years. So it'd be like, oh, if James didn't know what foreign exchange was in Japanese, then, we would look down on him. And so there was kind of like a slow build to that. But I was very grateful though that it wasn't just like a black company, which is known in Japan as like, they kind of use you. It's kind of like a bait and switch. Right. But I did get to experience a lot of the Japanese business culture from my company and then working with the customer. So a lot of times I take the customers out for drinks, and we would go to like a nomikai, and a lot of the conversation I could really absorb like what it really meant to work at a Japanese company, where a lot of Japanese companies, it's more of like, I would say like a fraternity in a way, where, all the university students, they rush in the beginning, right? They want to be part of this. Yeah, right. There's hazing. Yeah. That is a great way to put it. Yeah. So there's a haze in the beginning where you're expected to do a ton of overtime, and you don't really get a particular job. And so I know this more from talking to my Japanese friends more, where, they work for like a Honda. And I'm like, what do you do at Honda? And she's like, oh, I kind of just work like 100 different jobs. Like I just rotate. I don't really have a position name. And she's like, yeah, I'm expected to work there for like the rest of my life. And so she felt like very comfortable, like that, like to her, that was so normal, where, she didn't even consider working at other places and, like moving up in the company, or like the impact of her role in the business. Like to her, being in the company was the achievement of itself, like having that name brand, right. I would say.
Right.
And yeah, one thing I was surprised like to learn was that when you get accepted to a company in Japan, you get like a like a certificate.
Yeah.
Like, you're like naite, and it's like this like it looks like a graduation certificate, and then it's like
Right.
my friend showed me. I'm like, what, you get something like that?
I was visiting a customer, and they had it on their like on their wall in the company. So like it'd be like 1998, accepted. And it's 2018 and this guy still has it. Like, I don't know if he was at the same desk. I don't know if he was moving around different offices. And like a lot of the times when I would go out to drinks with them, like they never considered working for another company, where I think in America, it's more common to be like, okay, I've been here for 6 months, I'm already chasing like the next check, right?
It's already changing your LinkedIn status. Yeah. Open to work.
Like already open to work, CEO.
Yeah.
And I find that there's a lot of contradictions where, Japanese people are known to work very hard and, they want this high reputation, but achieving that comes in different situations. So working at Honda, that's your reputation. It's not like you're the CEO, but you're still in the same boat. Like you're working for a very, like well-known company. And it's the same with the hours. So like you would have Japanese people. And then I would also include the people that I work with. You have people who would lean on working longer hours, even if they didn't accomplish anything, just to show the physical part that they were there, right? That they were there working hard, even if the guy was falling asleep between the hours of 2 to 3. I've seen so many times. Yeah. And it was always this game, like who would leave first. So you had to be in the office from 9 to 6. And you couldn't really go home early unless you made like a request. And when it hit 6, nobody wanted to be the first one to go. So you would have people like eyeing each other. And so, it'd be like 30 minutes go by, nobody left. 40 minutes, nobody left. An hour goes by, nobody left. So then it would always come down to like the same 5 people, where it'd be like, this guy's going to take his turn, but there was no communication. So it'd be like some kind of like rotation where like this guy would go one time and then next time the guy would go. Right. It would just be like the strangest thing where people would just
musical
work.
Chairs.
Like no one's really working. Like it's past 6:30. I'm sure people are just buying time. And then I left once. One time I was the first person to leave. And then I forgot something. So I had the luxury of living close. So I walked back to work. It was maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock, and everybody was gone. So a lot of times it's like the presentation that you're working hard, unfortunately, and whereas like people, at least in America, value like what you can bring to the table. Like, like Eric, I don't care if you were here for all hours a day. You have to make that sale. And so the Japanese perspective is like the opposite.
I mean, I can imagine that it's like kind of rewarding to be like in that position, because it's like you have your class that you come in with and you're all in the same like group and you get hazed together, you're working hard together, and you all know like you're gonna stay here for like 40 years. So it's like you have like this incredible like rapport and bonding with everybody. So in a way it's kind of inspiring. But
I mean, that is a great point. And what's surprising is that a lot of couples come from work. So like you'd be in the same class, or you'd be like a next class over, and a lot of marriages would come from that. Like I have half of my friends who are dating someone because they're in the organization, either in the same class or around the same age. And I find that so surprising, because you'd feel like, okay, Japanese people, they want to focus solely on work, and which they do, but because they're there and it's more of their life, it actually becomes more of a blend of the personal and like the corporate life, I would say.
Right. Yeah, as long as they have like a good balance.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't really know how that balance was.
Yeah, I feel like they don't balance like in terms of like gender, but in Western companies they definitely do try to hit like certain quotas.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Like the best way I would
because like even like college applications in Japan, it's like pure merit, where they don't even look at anything except your test scores, right?
Right.
And so I heard like, I'm not sure it's true, but I heard like Todai's like proportion is like super skewed to like males, like 90% males or something.
Oh, interesting. I mean, what's surprising with that though is that you're required to put your headshot on your resume. So when you apply, you have to have a picture of yourself. And so like to me, I would think that would improve, I think, maybe diversity. But the way I look at the Japanese business world, it's like America in the 80s or 70s, where they're like a few decades back, unfortunately. But you still have a lot of movements with like women, where there's a popular woman who's like advocating that you can wear sneakers to work, because there's a lot of dress code policies for women that are strictly only for women, that you have to wear a skirt and like a dress shirt and like a blazer, and they have to like stick to that. So she's kind of advocating for this change, and you'd be like, oh, this change happened in America maybe like 50 years ago. And we're
like, yeah.
And I totally saw a lot of the gender roles in the workplace. So when we had a meeting, a lot of the women were supposed to be like the secretary. And so like we would have like a woman who's head of sales, but she would be the automatic like taking the notes for the meeting or getting people coffee. And I'm like, this woman is bringing like $100,000 a year in sales, like more than the male counterpart, but she's being viewed in this, slightly negative way. And a lot of the business managers would start the meetings by talking to the women like, oh, I like your shoes, I like your makeup, like you look cute today. And to me, that was more of like a surprise. Like, oh, I thought it would be more strictly business, like let's just focus on work. But a lot of the roles were, I think like revealed about the society, I guess in that lens.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess like kind of going back to like the Japanese, how good would you say like your Japanese got through like all of that and working at the company?
So I would say it wasn't N1, but it was N2 plus the business. So it'd be like I knew all the business terms because I would have to always use them. And those business terms would be on like that kanji test. It'd be like foreign exchange, commodities, stock, a lot of the trading algorithms names, like the computer program names. And so I just focused on that. So in the beginning, I was like, okay, I got to do JLPT, I got to do business. And I just was burning out. I wasn't remembering too much. So I said, okay, I'll focus on work and then I'll get the JLPT later. And I intended to go for the JLPT, but then COVID happened and they closed all the sites. So I was like, oh, what am I going to do? I can't get the certificate. But then it turned out that a lot of companies didn't really need it at a certain point. I think if you're a foreigner for whatever reason, they always require it to a certain extent. Like, it's like, oh, we're in this interview, we're speaking Japanese, talking about my strengths and weaknesses, my work experience. But James, I see you don't have this JLPT credential. And I'm just be like, well, I think you should just judge our conversation and not on some standardized test. And I think it went that way a lot of the times, but it was difficult to get my foot in the door if I didn't have that test, because I think a lot of them, they just use it as a screener, because I don't know how many foreigners would apply to these Japanese positions. Maybe they think their Japanese is really good. Maybe it's like N3 level at least. And then they don't, maybe they don't do well in the interview. So it kind of like started this trend, I think.
Right.
I see. And so I guess like in terms of like, being able to express yourself or like presentations, you think
yes,
you're pretty used to that?
That was so hard. So for me, the easiest part of the job was with customers, because I feel like the customer was very lenient. So like I could explain things like, okay, like, like the US dollar is down, we recommend that you trade the Japanese yen against the Australian currency. And then I would talk about the movement in the market and the updates in our product. And I think I kind of mastered that. And then when we started to dive into new areas of business, I would need like a little bit of a catch up. Like, okay, how do you say cryptocurrency in Japanese? And, I would have to figure this out. I wouldn't be able to really, I would hear it, but then I would be like, okay, like I kind of have to do like a lot more research on my own to be able to catch up to people. And so that was hard with the business that I was in. We were constantly changing our direction. Like one time we were in payments where we were talking to Family Mart and like KFC and Subway about introducing a payment platform. And like I remember the night before, I stayed up to like 3 a.m. just like on different websites, understanding how payments work and getting all the vocabulary. So it's interesting because I don't even know if I am N1. I haven't really taken the practice test. I've kind of just like been in this business world where I know all these terms, but like on what level do they exist on?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I feel like the test is pretty arbitrary. Like I passed in one, but I don't think I could talk about like
Oh,
Like
congratulations.
how the US dollar is down compared to like other currencies or stuff like that.
Yeah, it seems like a very difficult test in the way that it has like a specific like focus. Like, and you can't fail like a certain amount. I haven't really focused too much on the tests. Like my whole thing has just been like overall study, but it seems like the JLPT is great for like having a course, because I think as like language learners, we kind of just like open up to this brand new world. And if and maybe you guys are the same way, like if I had gone for like, okay, first year Japanese, I'll just aim for N5 and the next year do N4 and N3, I think I would have been so much better off than where I am now, because it would have given like a consistent structure. But, I'm looking back at those 1 through 3 years and I'm like, how much did I really learn vocab wise and kanji and grammar? And I think it would have been so much better to have like a structured plan, which I think the JLPT offers, as a huge benefit.
Right. And I guess now, though, we've kind of been building up Japan as the promised land, and you've been here for quite some time, right? But what kind of led you to going away from Japan? What was the reason you left?
Catalyst.
The catalyst, yeah.
The catalyst? Yeah, so I'm sure maybe like with you and a lot of listeners, it's like, why did you leave Japan? It's like, it's like the promised land, it's the dream country. What went wrong? And I think from being an avid listener of this podcast, sometimes you hear people say that they miss home. It wasn't what they thought it would be from anime, or they really didn't feel like they fit in. I felt like I was kind of the exception, where I had a lot of like external things that weren't really a part of the country. Like with COVID, I started to not like my job as much. I had missed my family because I was so interested to go to Japan with the study abroads and different things that I realized I didn't really spend a lot of time with them. So it kind of like built up where I was like, okay, it's like July and I can't leave the country and come back. Unfortunately that's the circumstance. Like, I'm not blaming the country, but I was like, okay, maybe it's just best for me to go home and spend time with my family. I don't know how COVID's going to last. And I was like, if I get COVID in Japan, how deadly is it going to be for me? Like, what's that experience? So I was just like, all right, I'm going to take the road with less risk. And it wasn't like I was able to hang out with my friends and do a lot during COVID because everybody was social distancing. A lot of things were closed and reopened. It was like Japan every week was undecided if they were going to close every store or have a nomikai with the whole country. It was just craziness where they were like, okay, we're going to keep the country locked, but we're going to give everyone discounts on traveling. So I got to save like $500 on the Shinkansen because of this campaign. And I was just so confused. Like, okay, I can't leave the country, but I can travel around the world in Japan. So my goal one day is to go back. I wanted to get more of a taste of the American work culture. So I had a comparison. Because when I was working in Japan, I was like, what even is American work culture? Because I had interned, but a lot of times that's not really what it's like being a full-time person. So my goal is to work in America for a few years and then kind of like start setting my aim back to Japan, maybe work there for a few years, maybe do like a 50-50 kind of interest. So, I mean, I think the longer I lived there, the longer I learned that there were more cons. And it didn't make me like it didn't make me like the country less, but it made me realize like, okay, Japan's a country just like any other place. Of course, we highlight it in the beginning because we see a lot of the benefits, right? We get to see all the sparkly new things. And then when you're there for a while, it dulls a little bit, but I've known a lot of people that are still living there 10, 20 years, and the shine is still relatively there. And, I think everyone's just different. Like, if you go into traveling to Japan because your base is on anime or it's on certain pop culture things, then I think a lot of times you're going to be left disappointed. Because when I'm maybe it's the same with you, where I wasn't really looking up what the real Japan was or like the real structure of Japan was. Like, we know all these stereotypes of the maid cafes and like the funny English and the beautiful scenery, but it's like, okay, if I work there, how much tax am I going to get paid out? How many times do I have to renew my visa? The Japanese government sent me a thing in the mail that I needed to pay 2,000 yen to the pension because they thought I was still in Japan when I was in America. So it's just like a lot of a lot of these real world things pop up, and you have to understand before you go, like, okay, like at what level am I going to deal with like as much real world things before I can, like, you know, not think of it as a great place anymore.
I see. Yeah, I mean, hopefully we get the return to Japan for James here. Comment down below if you want to see James back in Japan, or yeah, maybe we just decide your fate on if you go to Japan or not in the comment section.
Yeah. So make sure to smash that like button. If it's over 1,500 likes, I'm going back to Japan in 3 years.
All right.
And if it's not, he's not allowed to go.
Yeah, if it's not, if it's not, then I can't leave. I can't leave America. I'll burn my passport on the next podcast.
Yeah, guys, you got to make sure for James' sake that you do this for him. If James goes to Japan right now, as it stands, he's gonna go to the border immigration, and they're gonna look at his passport, and then they're gonna be like, "Hey, can I see your phone real quick?" And they're gonna go check this video.
Check the video,
and they're gonna see.
And then he's gonna get arrested.
Yeah, he's gonna get arrested.
And you know how you don't want to be in Japanese prison.
You don't want to be in Japanese.
It's not
prison.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen the horror stories of that.
Yeah,
of course not firsthand. Of course not firsthand.
This is about to be KoreKara After Dark right here.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, but guys, again, if you've seen one of our previous podcasts, the Tokini Andy one, you may have seen that if you do want to get into Japan, though, you're required to go watch every single KoreKara podcast episode. This is a requirement. You're gonna go there, you're gonna look at your phone, see the red bars all the way at the end, and they see it, and you go stamp you're in, you know. But if not, I don't know, guys. You might be in for a rude awakening. So just a heads up.
Yeah, I mean, personally, KoreKara podcast is my favorite podcast of all time.
Hey.
I've watched, I think, every episode.
Let's go.
Hey,
yo, you love to see it. And I mean, speaking of that, I mean, you've watched every single episode, James, so that means what's coming. You know what's coming. I know you've been preparing for this for quite some time, ever since you watched the first episode multiple times, you know. Ever since then, and every other episode, I know you've been concocting this, creating the best possible message to say right here to get you all those likes to send you back to Japan. So James, I'm gonna put you on the spot right here. Put you back on the spot for potentially going back to Japan. What is your message to the KoreKara squad?
So I think my message is the Japanese proverb where it's like even dust can build a mountain. It's like chiri motsu moreba yama toru naru, where it's just like, you know, I think what it comes to language learning is that everyone just wants to be N1, right? And how many months, how many days can we get to N1? But no one's like, oh, if we get to N1, what's the plan next? And a lot of those people burn out, unfortunately. And I think that if we just do a little bit every day with either Japanese learning or whatever we do, you'll be so surprised with what you can accomplish, because time moves so much faster than we think, especially as we get older. And I think that, you know, a lot of times we just don't think of these small steps, and we just focus of these bigger goals. But a lot of our dreams can be accomplished if we think of these dreams into like sub dreams, where we can just knock out point after point, maintain motivation, and then you will be surprised at how close your dream is.
That was super inspirational, James.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, I can really see the time you put in for that. The time you put in for that KoreKara message. You gotta give it up for James here.
I'd like to thank the Academy.
Oh, we got the whole award speech here. Let's get it.
And second, pitch accent is not important in my opinion.
All right.
Yeah,
let us know what you guys think of that in the comments.
That sounds pretty aggressive. Let us know what you guys think of that.
Yeah, I'm just ready to be canceled.
All right, guys, let's see what happens in the comments. Will James get canceled, or will he get sent back to Japan, or will he get sent back to Japan because he got canceled? Who knows? We'll see what happens. But with that, James, it's been a pleasure. Appreciate you coming on the show today. It's been fun, man.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for having me. This is a real dream come true.
You love to see it.
Hey guys, thanks for making it to the end of the podcast. Comment down below if you smash the like button. This is a test, guys. Very important. But you know what else is important? Our patrons. And we got Cedric Frost, Kevin Tasme, Alan Card, Drew, Jack, Jeanette, Joey, KH90 Meredith, MKSXN, Nathan Polars, Jack, and Yui, and Sad Boy.